Welcome to Team Talk, a PESTA podcast series.
Today, we are honored to have Dr. Terry Sweeting, who is an emeritus professor who retired from the California State University in Northridge.
She's a licensed consultant in elementary physical education and children's dance, including curriculum development and teacher education.
She received the National Dance Society Scholar Award in 2022 and is a member of Dance Council in UNESCO.
Dr. Terry Sweeting is very familiar with Singapore's peak curriculum and mainstream school context, having supported schools during her engagements in 2017 and 2024. During these engagements, she not only observed lessons and facilitated professional discussion, she also conducted lessons that demonstrated the application of teaching strategies which enhanced students' learning experiences.
Terry, I understand you've been with us in supporting schools and PESTA in 2017 and in 2024, and then this year you're with us again.
Yes.
Right? Thank you for being here and thank you for supporting our teachers.
Privileged to be here.
So far you have been with, in the last 2 weeks you've been with our schools and our teachers. How has the experience been for you so far?
Well, I always love going into the schools because I'm so impressed with the quality of the physical education programs and just the facilities there. What I'm very pleased about is that the teachers I've been working with, although they're coming from a variety of different levels of background or interest in teaching dance, are very willing to kind of be a little vulnerable, I guess is the word, that they're to invite me to come into their classes and observe them. That's not always easy to do. But what I've appreciated about is afterwards we often take the time to talk about what we've seen and what they've done in the lesson, and they can reflect on what they felt went well, perhaps what they wanted to improve upon. And then I've really felt encouraged by some of the feedback I've been able to give them. When I look at their second lessons, it's amazing how much information they've been able to take and sort of say, okay, I can do something with this, and how can I improve that, even that second lesson. So what that tells me is that there's wonderful opportunity here to really help teachers be able to sort of start where they are and begin to grow from there. And there's quite a variety of different experiences that I've watched with them, but I'm very encouraged by the effort and the learning that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, our teachers are quite reflective. Good to know they're very reflective and they're able to apply what they have learned very fairly quickly. Were there any something memorable during this trip that you would like to share? There's
times in a certain lesson. I don't know if I'm supposed to mention names, but but we've watched a couple of teachers who have been willing to demonstrate, and I think that's tricky because if you don't come from a dance background or a theater background, the feeling might be, well, how do I begin to show the children what it's supposed to look like? And to just be willing to go out and just perform for the children is wonderful, because I'm seeing some really unique and fun ways that teachers are demonstrating. So I think that was really encouraging. And if they don't feel comfortable demonstrating, with their own bodies, they're showing examples in videos and little clips as ways to help children see variety in the movements that they're doing.
Okay. I mean, personally, I'm trained in the secondary school PE scene. Yes. So if I were to teach in a primary school, I would feel I might a bit anxious and more conscious about my body if I were to teach dance.
Sure.
Yeah. If I were to make that jump to teach in a primary school scene, how can I start? Like, how can I prepare myself mentally? And what are the things that I can do with the kids first to make myself comfortable?
I think certainly at the primary level, at the P1 and 2, it's really basic dance elements. So when we think about what we call the Rudolph Le Bon framework, the teachers are quite familiar with that, as it's not just applied to dance, because you can apply it to games and gymnastics and all kinds of movement forms. So many teachers come in with sort of at least an exposure and understanding of those Le Bon movements. I think it's important early on with children to be able to really encourage this idea of building sequences of movement. So they want to take what they've done and begin to put it together into little sequences of movement. So if you're not comfortable necessarily demonstrating yourself frequently in a lesson. It's just look at what the children give you and really make a point of moving around and say, oh my goodness, that was a really unique shape that I saw here. That's different from this person's shape. There's a different base that I see. I'm seeing where the focus is. So you can begin to actually take what the children give you and see that and use that as an example of this is a different way to demonstrate this particular action.
Right.
If you're not seeing much variety, then it is helpful if you can demonstrate even 2 or 3 examples so that they see the variety of choices that they have.
Yeah. I've also heard from our interns when they observed your lessons, they said you use a lot of teams and storytelling in your how the students can show their movement. Could you share like one particular theme that maybe I could try with my students?
But I think typically with children's creative dance, we draw from probably 3 main areas. One area can be the other art forms. Another area can certainly be within like nature and sort of the natural world. And then the third is what we call sort of interdisciplinary connections, where you can draw from other subject areas. So to take some examples, if we were to draw from the arts world, oftentimes you can bring in like visual art pictures, right? And you can look at the pictures and say, what kinds of shapes are you seeing?
Oh, okay.
Is there maybe motion that we're seeing in this particular picture? Is there something about this that we can see a story that this picture is telling us, right? Music itself is very rich. We often encourage music being used in, I would say, most creative dance lessons, although you can certainly do it without music. But if you listen to music, and I encourage teachers to often pick what I would say more instrumental music rather than music with lyrics. And typically with the music, it helps if there's a beat sometimes, that can help the teacher guide the structure of the dance. But other music has so much dynamic energy to it. Often theme songs from the big movies. It might be something to do with a superhero or a monster. Or I've used music from the Pink Panther, which was a suspense type of music. Yes. and there's a theme song with Peter Gunn, and it's really to do with this idea of, you know, the thief and the caper and the stories developing, these mystery type stories. And when they listen to it, the children can get so excited because you can feel the dynamic energy in that music, right? So that's kind of in the arts realm. Another area is certainly in nature. And one of the challenges with picking themes in nature is that it is helpful to pick themes that have a broad variety in them. So for example, you talk to the children about the idea of being clouds. Well, if you were to close your eyes and imagine a cloud, there's so many different shapes in the sky that immediately the variety's there. Or if you think about trees, how many different kinds of trees there are, or leaves. The risk is that if you say you're going to be a fish, right? What can tend to happen, and we've seen this a few times in lessons, is the children have a tendency to do what we call more imitation of, or almost a theatrical replication of this. So the key for a teacher then is to say that's where the children start. That's their understanding of what this particular shape is, or how this creature moves. But we do such a disservice when we realize that in the natural world, these same creatures are moving in so many different ways. And there's beautiful now videos, so many different nature videos, where just a short little clip of that same creature moving in 5 different ways. So what that child begins to see is, I'm learning observation in nature. And the more I observe the variety in nature, it also can come back to the dance experience and realize that there's not just one way to do this. So the challenge for the teacher is, when you're using nature themes, is make sure that you start where they are, but you want to expand them into more variety. So they're moving to different bases, they're moving to different levels, they're trying different speeds, even though it's replicating perhaps that same creature, right?
Yeah.
In the classroom, if you're wanting to connect with what we call interdisciplinary study, a popular area, of course, you can do something in math where maybe it's to do with magnets and something coming together and pulling apart.
Okay. So there's the element of force.
Force, absolutely a force. That's exactly right. The area of language arts and literature is so rich for children's creative dance. There's amazing storybooks that have often illustrations that can inspire children. In one of the sessions we did, the theme was on an adventure in Monsterland. And the idea was that I had some storybooks about Where the Wild Things Are, a very popular children's book. It has monster pictures, and there's other pictures in there. The idea is that the children get to go into a world of fantasy, but the intent is not to look like everybody else. They get to create their own vision of what they want to look like. And often poetry, there can be some wonderful poems for children that you share it with them. You can actually have them, you can work on designing a sequence on that poem, or just take out the main characters from it and then develop a sequence around it. So there's really a variety of different ways that we can use what we call, I'm talking about topic themes. These are the kinds of things that just get children interested in the idea of why are we doing dance.
Yeah.
And the main emphasis is what are the movement themes that you're doing? What are you actually teaching them about dance content? So they go hand in hand, right? You're through this storyline, you're really engaging in that dance content that you really want them to understand.
Yeah, and they could see the relevance of the dance content with nature.
Yes,
and
yes.
interdisciplinary themes as well.
Right,
Yeah,
there's so many different.
Cool, yeah. And the awareness of it will increase for the students through their observations of the world as well.
That's right, yes.
I mean, with my little knowledge that I have of dance, with my two boys, I'm father of two boys who are 5 and 7.
Yes.
Some of the things that I like to play with them is like, oh, the floor is lava, or the floor has ants.
Wonderful,
Yeah, so
wonderful.
the movement quickly changes.
Yes.
And I'll say, oh, there's a big helicopter coming, you have to lower yourself down, right?
Yes.
And when you ask for suggestions from the kids themselves, they will come up with many different variety of movements
Yes.
on their own. So I think the children are great knowledge of, a great source of creating different kind of movements as well.
Right. The intent of the teacher, which is always important, is that you always want to be there to, number one, create the structure of the dance sequence. Sometimes we get a little confused about, well, what does this idea of like creative dance mean? And really, in essence, it can be thought of as either a conceptual approach to teaching, or it can actually be thought of as dance content itself. But the idea is that you're really developing motor skills at the same time as aesthetic expression. And so as teachers, the role with the teacher is to make sure that structure is really clearly identified, so that the children know that even though they're moving like lava, that there's times where they need to be very still and other times that they're moving. And so the structure in it actually is the intent of that sequence. So they're not just randomly moving all over the place and they don't know when to stop, for example. So that's really important as the teacher's role, and also to be there to determine the criteria of what's quality.
Yeah. That naturally brings me to the question I would like to ask. What creative dance is and its role in the holistic development of a child? Because in primary school syllabus, dance is part of its content area.
Yes, yes.
Perhaps teachers might, usually PE teachers have tons of experience in playing sports and gymnastics. But however, when it comes to dance, they may not have that experience, or very few of us have some dance background.
Right.
So what I would like to find out from you is, how do we bring meaning to the teaching of dance? How am I able to let the teachers know that dance is important?
Yes.
It's for the holistic development of the kids.
Yes. I think if teachers can understand that what's very, very unique about creative dance in the school curriculum is that it really is a unique way to really encourage the development of aesthetic expression in relationship to the fundamental and technical skills, right? So an example of that might be that, let's take, say, skipping, for example. If the children are asked to just simply skip around, right, there's no intention of it. So if we were to take like skipping or traveling patterns in the games world, we know there's an intent to it, that you travel sideways very quickly to grab a ball. You run forward or backward because you're maybe reacting to a player coming at you. There's purposeful movement in the fundamental motor patterns. That's exactly the same idea in children's creative dance, in that there's a context to it. So if you just have the children moving around and skipping, and then moving around and jumping, and then moving around and say galloping, and there's no intent to what they're doing.
There's no goal towards it.
There's no goal to it. Then sometimes children think, well, why am I doing this? Like, you're calling this creative dance, but it's not meaningful to me. So the idea is you always put it into a context. So you go back to skipping, right? When do children skip? Typically they skip when they're happy, when something joyful is happening. So perhaps you have a little sequence in which the nature of this time, this little adventure in the story, is something as happy and gleeful and joyful. So you have the children skipping for a few counts with the idea that that gives an intent to why they're doing skipping. So I think that each time they're learning something, it's very important to take it beyond just, we're going to practice galloping, we're going to practice creeping, and put it into a context of a sequence. So for a beginning teacher, one of the most important messages is to really understand what a sequence is, and that is a still, held shape at the beginning, there's movement, and then there's a held shape at the end. That's just the very basic definition of a sequence. Once they kind of understand that, then it's important to hold children accountable. And when we look at children all the time, we often think, how often are they still? Like, how often are they really still? And so when we move a child into a particular shape, so we've asked them to make some kind of a shape, a pointy shape representing a tree, or a big bulbous shape representing a cloud. The idea is, can we actually ask them to be very, very still for just a few seconds? And that's very good for the children to be, we call it sort of an alertness, a mindfulness, that they're not just sort of hanging there waiting, but they're staying ready for the next movement. But it's also very good for them because they're learning just to kind of stay focused, to be aware, because something else is about to happen. So it's important to think what we're doing with children's creative dance is we're giving them different kinds of experiences within the world of aesthetic expression.
Okay, it brings me to the next question. So you were mentioning they'll be still, and then they'll do a movement,
Yes.
and they're still. But how do we know that we are getting the students to produce quality movement, and it's how do we get our students so once we have a sensing of what quality movement is,
Yes.
perhaps we can bring the student to improve on their movement.
Yes.
Yeah, so what does it look like?
Yes. That's a very important question, and it actually takes time to develop. And this really goes back to what we call sort of content knowledge, and the understanding of really what the dance elements are, and then what we call pedagogically content knowledge, or pedagogical content knowledge is how do you teach that and kind of scaffold for it so that you're encouraging that quality to happen. Within that, it's an interesting word, but we often have what we call refinements. And what that means when you're refining something is you're finding ways to make it better, right? So going back to what is the criteria in the given lesson. So if you're actually, just to go back to my earlier example, if you're asking for a shape and then travel shape, and that's your very basic sequence at this for the primary, say ones, quality is going to start by that very first shape that they make. Do they have a commitment to when you talk pointy, or you talk twisted, or you talk round? Are they really showing that the best way they can with body parts? Can they show that same kind of shape on a variety of different bases?
All right.
And by bases, I mean, where's the weight of the body being taken? Once they're there, then you can begin to talk with them a little bit about maybe the focus, like where are their eyes? And actually in children's dances, in all dance, eventually where the focus of the eyes is can be very important, because it can help to reflect a feeling and emotion and intent. And sometimes eyes are flitting all around and the children aren't really sure where to look. And sometimes if you just say, just pick a spot and just look at it while you're holding very, very still. Imagine that beautiful fluffy cloud that you're making as you look over at that spot. It's amazing how that kind of concentration is part of quality. It's part of showing an intent. As time goes on, particularly the slightly upper primary grades, we really work on this idea of what we call the dynamics. Another word for it is effort qualities. And that's where we're looking at examples around speed. Can they do something ever so slowly, but in control? Can they do something very quickly, but in control? Can they do something as very exaggerated or large shapes versus very small shapes? So when the children initially do something, often if we have an example where we were watching a dance and it was a caper ID, and they were breaking into this office and they were going ahead and they were doing all kinds of opening a safe, right? So the children were very, very focused, and we saw them there and they were doing this. So we wanted to take that from a place of imitation. How could you take that and how could you do that idea with a different body part?
Okay.
How could you exaggerate and go really big with that whole dial you're working? And maybe it even takes you around in a swaying motion. How can you take it and do it very, very fast, very, very slow? So you take the initial actions that the children give you, and the quality comes in when you ask them to exaggerate the motions and the movements, but they're doing it in control and with good purpose. And then they finish their sequences again in this idea of stillness. So the essence eventually of all dance is really in this realm of dynamics. If you want to show something that you're a strong monster, we did monsters the other day. It's always a fun topic.
Yeah.
And the idea was that the children were making themselves into a certain shape, right? But some of them would just make it, right? And so they're big, but when you said to them, can you show that you're firm to the point that your muscles are just shaking and you are just a big monster and you are scary? The idea is that you're then helping them to internalize that. You really want them to think, okay, this is a feeling I get to have, and this is how I get to express that. That's part of quality too, because it's a commitment to that part of the action as they're doing it.
Yeah. So it creates greater awareness, body awareness.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And what we would like to, what I'm gleaning from this conversation is like we get our students to have greater awareness of their body and
Yes.
express it through their movement.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And when we are looking at quality movement,
Yes.
then it will be we will move on to assessment.
Yes, yes.
Assessing for learning creative dance. So our PE teachers face some challenges in observing
Yes.
students' movement and provide some constructive feedback. I
Yes,
think
yes.
it came very naturally to you. The story they told about the opening of the safe,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then you told them, could you do a big dial, or could you do it faster or slower, right? But how can our teachers able to provide that kind of feedback to our students so they could improve on their movement?
Right. I'm going to share with you actually a lovely quote that is really about this whole idea of critical thinking, right? So how can we help our children to become critical thinkers through this process, and as we give them constructive feedback, and also as teachers. And it was a quote by a psychologist and teacher educator from Canada. Her name is Eleanor Duckworth, and she said, "The more we help children to have their wonderful ideas and to feel good about themselves for having them, the more likely it is that they will someday happen upon wonderful ideas that no one else has happened upon before," right?
Wow.
So what's really, I just love that quote, because what that really gets at is this whole idea of that value of diversity, that value of coming up with unique ideas, the value in, if everyone always looks the same all the time, as in unison movement, then there's only been one solution that we've come up with and everyone's doing it.
Yeah.
When in essence, there could be many different solutions, right? So as teachers are looking at this idea of assessment, we can sort of divide that into, I'm focusing probably more on what we would call the cognitive domain, right? Because that's really about helping students, number one, to understand the knowledge of dance. And that is, when they think about levels, do they really immediately know about high levels, low levels, and medium levels? But it's also connected to different bases, right? And so when I'm thinking about shapes, I want to be mindful immediately that I don't always have to depend on the teacher to be prompting me, that immediately I know I can choose a high shape, I can choose a low shape, a medium shape, and I can go to a different base. So you're beginning, as you watch the children over time in your feedback, is how can you be encouraging children to become self and become independent reflectors of their own movement? So that's pretty higher order thinking skills, right? That's kind of something we're working them towards. So in the early stages is just checking on their knowledge about, do they understand the content? You know, get some very simple questions you can ask about the content, and always ask the question why. Why do you think that this particular shape might be more interesting in that shape? So if we're talking about trees, you know, someone just does a tree like this, and then someone else does a tree like this, why might that second shape be more interesting? So as you're walking around the floor and you're assessing quality, part of your feedback is you can certainly comment on, you know, this is something you did really well, and maybe this is a suggestion to do it more. But I think also part of feedback is that place where you're prompting the children to think about what their bodies are doing and why. And that's also a really valuable part of the feedback process, because you want them to become independent movers eventually.
Okay, cool. Could an extension of the feedback would be, could you try something else, right? Or you could provide a scenario, change the scenario. Okay, now you're a tree like this, but the tree is on perhaps it's being chopped down, right? What will happen to it next? Like, could the feedback involve get the students to think a bit more critically about the scenarios that you put in?
That's right. And what might be some other little situations where that tree might look different, or when you look at a different type of forest, you know, an evergreen forest in say the United States versus a type of rainforest in your own backyard. So the children are also beginning to, if you've been able to show them perhaps some different pictures of it or demonstrate with your own body, you're encouraging them to be able to also think about what variety of movements in nature that there might be for them to try. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. With that, I'd like to bring about one challenge that some teachers have faced. It's teaching dance to the upper primary level,
yes,
like primary 6, especially
yes,
when it comes to, from what I hear from the teachers, is
yes,
teaching boys especially.
Yes, yes.
How do you get the boys to move, or the upper primary school kids to move?
Well, there's no doubt that, as in any content area, the intent of a curriculum is to start at P1, right? So that by the time a child gets to P6, they have some foundational content in which to build on. So there's no doubt that teachers are at a disadvantage if all of a sudden they have a P6 and they've never had any, you know, kind of dance experience. I think it's very important to capture interest by going to topics that are meaningful to the students at that level. So there's sometimes we can move into the world of, say, sport, where we get the students to perhaps initially imitate an action, such as what are they doing perhaps on a basketball court, a certain, you know, set shot, or maybe I'm passing it to a partner. And then we can begin to kind of what we call infuse or layer some of the dance content into those movements again to make them more dance-like. So if they're doing an action, can they do it ever so slowly? Can they go from a ready position when they do the execution and the follow-through? Does it take them from this medium or high level? Can they actually finish on the floor? Okay. So they're actually doing a transition onto the floor, even though they're showing that very same movement. So I think that's a really important time to capture topics that are of interest to the students and infuse the dance content into it. And again, it could be through nature. And I've actually seen music can actually do a wonderful job. I remember a few years back when I was here watching a teacher, and these were P4 students, but this same lesson could have easily been done with P6s who had no experience. The music was actually had lyrics to it, and it was very heartfelt. It was about sort of friendships or relationships that were challenged or difficult. And I remember watching a couple little boys, and it was amazing that the one little boy particularly was just completely lost in his message. And he was up high spinning, and he was landing and turning. And I looked at that and I just thought, I was talking with him afterwards, and I said, you know, do you dance a lot? And he said, no, I've just been doing it in this class. And I said, how does that make you feel? And he said, you know, it's the one time where I come into the class and I feel like I'm special, like I can really do something really well. And I thought, that's the gift, isn't it? Because so often when all the attention is always on sports, the children may all do it, and there's so many different wonderful sports, and there's so many different choices, and it's wonderful that we have them. But the whole richness of the expressive experience in creative dance gives children a chance to be vulnerable with themselves, to be vulnerable with a peer, and to build that trust that we are here together. We're all trying something in a safe place. This is not about laughing at each other. This is about supporting each other. But we're going to see some really lovely things today and some really interesting things because you have it in you. And the more we can just capture those unique settings and those unique students, that's what you build upon and you trust. Yeah. We have teachers out there teaching all boys classes, and even though they're more primary levels, what's drawing them in is the nature of the topic themes that they're picking. And just to always work back, get those dance elements in there, but the children are captivated. The music just picks up that energy, and they're excited to be a monster. They're excited to be a thief. They're excited to move into this fantasy world because they get a chance to lose themselves in fantasy. So it's the same as creative writing. The teacher will ask these children to do a creative writing article, right? You want them to think in a unique way, right? Or if the visual art teacher is asking the children to draw something, you want them to think in a unique way. This is their opportunity to move in a unique way kinesthetically. They get to move it with their bodies and feel it with their bodies as opposed to simply something external. So it's just some value.
That's cool. I mean, people who are listening to it will definitely try some of the things that you mentioned. Just like you mentioned about creating a safe space for students. Is there any tips that you have for teachers in terms of creating a safe space in a dance context?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. Because safety isn't just about physical safety, but it's really emotional safety, and that's really important. And that ties in with your 21st century competencies. It's about, feeling that you're in a place where you do feel safe with your peers, that there's respect. A couple of key things right away is I really encourage the teachers to have a situation, number one, where there's often moments during the lesson of silence. Okay. And often what silence will do is it allows children just to kind of breathe. It gives them a chance to focus. Mm-hmm. And when the noise is calmed down, it also helps to allow students to be in that place of feeling connected. Sometimes when there's a lot of social chatter, it can be almost a distraction to what the intent of the lesson really is. So I'll often talk about just find those moments in your lesson where you can absolutely have absolute silence in what the children are doing. There's value sometimes in having them in bare feet because they're also getting a feeling that they're moving on the floor freely and can really kind of get that sensation with their feet that they're moving. So how does safety happen? You as a teacher are important there because any time that you can see what children are doing that are unique, compliment them in what they're doing, that they're willing to try something different, encouraging children when they give each other feedback, that part of being a critical thinker is to look at something and when you give a statement of perhaps you might want to try this, so you're asking them to maybe change or reconsider. It's not meant to be mean-spirited and it's not meant to be disrespectful. It's meant to say, I really care about what I saw and this might be a suggestion to help you move to a better place. So in the nature of even the feedback that children give each other, that groups give each other, you're asking them to be respectful and that creates safety, right? I'm not being laughed at or ridiculed because I actually took a risk, and it's actually fun to take a risk, and it's encouraged to take a risk because I get to look different than somebody else. Yeah. And that's really the gift that's so unique. And if we look in the games world, oftentimes those people who have become our amazing heroes in all kinds of sports and whatever, somebody has taken a risk and done something different, and it worked. It worked. Whether it was a brand new way, I remember the Fosbury flop, and I think Debbie Brill did the same thing, and it went from that straight jumping over, all of a sudden they're coming out over their back. That was experimented. That was trying something different to say, is this going to work or isn't it? Well, guess what? It took it to a whole new level. Yeah. And we see examples of that all over the sports world. It's the same idea in creative dance, is that you give them a chance to try something different. And that may not work, and it doesn't work for me, it doesn't look good, I'm going to try something else. But that's the setting that you have for your safe environment.
Oh, that's cool. Like creating an environment where it is okay to try something new. Actually,
absolutely.
We want them to try something new.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have a lot of encouraging words, you pick out very good examples.
Exactly.
And you also teach our kids? How do you provide respectful feedback?
That's exactly right. And you're always pushing them, so you see where they're at. But the idea of the teacher is then when you're going back to this feedback and giving them giving yourself a chance to respond to them, is that's where you're encouraging them to broaden the choices that they have. You're just extending their repertoire of movement. It's not being critical of what they've started with, but rather saying, how can we look at other ways of doing this, and what are other choices that we have to expand your movement choices? Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could end it with perhaps a word of encouragement for our Singapore teachers.
Oh, well, what I've seen is I'm loving the fact that the teachers, as I mentioned earlier, are willing to be vulnerable, are willing to say, I'm not sure that I know everything yet, and I have a long way to go, but I'm so willing to learn. And I think that's just, once you have that mindset, the sky's the limit. And when I see the growth and the changes in teachers so quickly after a little bit of feedback and going back and really reflecting on their own teaching practices and how I can use the content better, look at teaching effectiveness better. Some of it compares to what I'm already doing. There's things in gymnastics or games that I can just transfer into the dance world, but there's other things that are new to me, and I'm trying to figure out. The best thing they can do is come up with questions. Always finish the end of your reflection. What's the next question you want to ask? Where's somebody I can ask who might have more information than me? So anytime you can come up with a question, that's always a rich way to know I'm still growing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So Singapore teachers should have, even on topics they might not be so comfortable in, such as dance, have an open mindset, the willingness to grow and ask questions.
That's right.
From how we started, you also mentioned that that's something you've observed in our teachers.
Yes.
Really.
There's a building community here, I would say little clusters of what we call sort of dance cultures, communities, where we're identifying teachers already who are showing more what I would say advanced learning, that they're picking up some of the information, the feedback more quickly, they're synthesizing information and creating more quality lessons now than even when I first observed them a few years ago. And so what I see with that is wonderful potential for mentorship within the schools, that I am someone who has a bit of experience, I could be helping other teachers. The more we can build communities of support, and we have wonderful support coming from PESTA. I mean, the teachers can make a call to say, come and give me some information, observe me teaching. PESTA is an amazing organization that Singapore has, and you're very lucky to have it. So that also helps to promote that community and culture, that it's not just I'm going to think about it today and then as time goes on I forget. It's stay connected to people who are supporting you, and that's how communities grow.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Terry, for joining us. I think I've learned so much from this conversation. It was like a crash course for me in terms of wanting to, if I were to make the switch to primary school, I think I'll be quite confident and I'll know where to start. Thank you for taking.
We'll look for you soon.